Nick Saban is the GOAT. There is no question about that. You also know that you've arrived at the place where we don't necessarily just take the label. We scrutinize, we analyze, and we break it down. Right here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you all stopping by. We are going to go through the GOATs, the coaches in question in college football history who could have a claim to GOAT status or a challenge of Nick Saban's supposed title. Please comment down below, like the video, and subscribe right here at the Voice of College Football. Let's start with the wins total in college football history. Joe Paterno, who spent 46 years at Penn State, is number one all-time with 409 wins. Bobby Bowden, number two at 357 after stints at West Virginia and Florida State. The Bear is at 323. Most of his success coming at Alabama after his tenure at Kentucky, Maryland, and Texas A&M. Pop Warner at 314. He was the all-time leader before the Bear passed him in the early 80s. There is Nick Saban at 297. Of course, prior to Alabama, he was at Toledo, Michigan State, and LSU. Amos Alonzo Stagg at 282. Mack Brown at 276, of course, still coaching after stepping away from the game following his Texas stint. He's back in North Carolina for a second stop in Chapel Hill. Lavelle Edwards, legendary BYU coach who revolutionized the passing game at 257. Tom Osborne at 255. All of his seasons from 1973 through 97 at Nebraska. Lou Holtz at 249, and he was all over the place. Lou Holtz, his final stop, of course, at South Carolina, his most notable stop with his 1988 national championship at Notre Dame. Now, that list was total wins, of course, but these coaches also lose games, and therefore winning percentage, to me, is a more meaningful statistic, although the wins do speak to longevity. Let's go to winning percentage. Knute Rockne won 105 and only lost 12 games with 5 ties at Notre Dame with an .881 winning percentage. Frank Leahy, also at Notre Dame, after a quick stint at Boston College with a claimed national championship at 107-13 with 9 ties as number 2. Okay, we know that those guys performed their duties in a different era a long, long time ago. But post-World War II, modern college football, look at Urban Meyer, .854 winning percentage at Bowling Green, Florida, Utah, and Ohio State. We're going way back in time for George Washington Woodruff as well. More modern coaches there in the Big Eight with Barry Switzer and Tom Osborne at number 5 and number 6 all-time, and they did all their coaching at one school. Charlie Moran at Centray and Texas A&M with an .833 winning percentage. Let's go to the more prominent coaches like Fielding Yost at Michigan, who, of course, built that great dynasty. Bob Neyland at Tennessee won almost 83% of his games. Jim Tressel at Ohio State, an .828 winning percentage with 106 wins and only 22 losses from 2001 to 2010. Some of the other winning percentage leaders, Bud Wilkinson, what a run he had at OU. We'll talk more Bud a little bit later. Frank Thomas at Bama. There is Nick Saban at 806. Bob Stoops just a tick below at 799. Spent his entire career as a head coach at Oklahoma. Dabo Sweeney, of course, still doing his work at Clemson. That winning percentage has taken a bit of a hit with 10-3, 11-3, and 9-4 the past 3 seasons, but still exceptional at 170-43. The recently retired Chris Peterson. We also have, there's the Bear Bryant, 780 winning percentage all-time. Bo Schembechler at 775 without a national championship. And then down near the end of the top 30, Woody Hayes, who coached, of course, at Ohio State with a 761 winning percentage. Here in 2024, we talk about bowl games being meaningless, and they did start out way, way back as exhibition games, and the poll era, which started with the AP poll in 1936, did not take the bowl games into account until much later. However, there is no doubt, starting pretty much in the 1950s, the 60s, 70s, 80s, up until just a few years ago, these bowl games were mighty meaningful. Keep also in mind that most of the bowl winning percentage that we're going to display, because of the status of these coaches, number one, and number two, because most of them coached during a time in which there were much fewer bowl games there at one point were just the major bowl games. You had to have a top 10 or 15 team in the nation to play in a bowl game. The minimum requirement, at least on this list, for bowl winning percentage is 10 games. Kirby Smart, of course, it's just the outset of his greatness, already has 2 national championships. Cannot really be considered near the top, the very top of the list of all-time greats at this point, but he is coming on strong in a hurry. Jimbo Fisher at 8-2. Urban Meyer, his success in the postseason, wow, legendary. 3 national championships, a ton of other major bowl wins for teams that finished in the top 5 to 10 in the nation. You see Pat Dye at Auburn had a nice run at 7-2-1. Other all-time greats, Dan Devine won a national championship at Notre Dame, of course, in 1977. Barry Alvarez won 3 Rose Bowls among his 9-4 record at Wisconsin. Bobby Bowden 22-10-1. So again, the winning percentage maintenance becomes difficult when you coach that many games, and for Bobby Bowden to win over 68% of his bowl games is remarkable. Then you also see Don James, one of the all-time greats, at 10-5. Joe Paterno 24-12-1 at Penn State. Barry Switzer went 8-5 at Oklahoma. Of course, he also won 3 national championships. Nick Saban 19-12 in his bowl stops, 31 of them. Brian Kelly just getting started at LSU is 9-6 overall. Dabo Swinney at 12-8. Now let's go to what most of you consider to be the gold standard, national championships. And that will be the first line under Nick Saban's name when anybody is making an argument about him being the greatest of all time, would be 7 national championships. So it's got to be Nick Saban, right? Okay, let's understand that national championships today are more legitimate than they've ever been in college football. We have an argument for who should make the playoffs, certainly. So you've got 1 or 2 teams typically that are left out of the 14 playoff that had an argument to be placed in the playoff. But there's no question that the 4 teams that make the playoff basically earned a playoff spot. And then they won 2 high-level games against 2 of the top teams in the country to win a national championship. So we're at a time and place in the last 10 years with this college football playoff era where the national championship is the most legitimate. So this is kudos to Nick Saban. He checks the box in not just winning national championships, but winning them during an era, the BCS and the college football playoff, where they are the most legitimate. Go back to the BCS era. They're less legitimate, but still, you at least took 2 of the best teams in the country, typically 2 of the top 3 or 4 teams in the country. Again, we could go year to year, and there's always an argument over who could have played in the national championship, who else had just as good a resume to play in the national championship. But Saban was able to, of course, win a BCS championship both in 2003 and in 2009, LSU and Alabama. But going back to 1997 and before, are the national championships legitimate? Well, some are, some aren't. Some are legitimate for the teams that were awarded the national championship, but there were typically other teams that earned it just as much as they did. Just about every national championship, 1997 and backwards, is disputed. So let's keep in mind when we look at these national championships, and we will outline some of these examples of where national championships a bit skewed, a bit of an inexact statistic. It's not like we're talking about Super Bowls in the NFL. And also, I'm going to add another perspective on it, not just national championships, but national championships in how many seasons. Nick Saban won 7 national championships. I am going to take out his seasons at Toledo because he didn't have a chance to win a national championship there as a non-Power 5. Nick Saban coached 27 years, 7 national championships. Bear Bryant, 6 national titles in 38 seasons. Bernie Bierman, who coached at Minnesota from 1932 to 50, won 3 national titles at Minnesota, 5 total in 22 years. Woody Hayes at Ohio State, 5 total national championships in 28 years. So we break it down a little bit more by percentage. Frank Leahy, Howard Jones, Walter Camp, Newt Rockne, guys that we're going to take out of the final discussion because football was just so much different. So many claimed national championships, so few of games played, and so few games played against top-level teams that the ranking of these guys, even though they were remarkable coaches and laid the groundwork of what we experience today in college football. So we are indebted to guys like Howard Jones, Walter Camp, Newt Rockne, Amos Alonzo Stagg, Frank Leahy, these guys that were so remarkable. And Leahy, obviously, in a much more recent era, so I don't want to incorrectly label him as a pioneer because his career at Notre Dame, 1941 to 53. John McKay won 4 national championships in 16 years. Urban Meyer, 3 national championships in 12 seasons. We're taking out Bowling Green and Utah because he actually had an undefeated team at Utah and won a BCS bowl game but did not get awarded a national championship. Also had an undefeated team at Ohio State in 2012 that could have won the national championship. Certainly would have played for the national championship, but were not given that because of probation. So Urban, 3 out of 12 seasons. Tom Osborne also won 3 national championships, but at Nebraska for 25 years. Darrell Royal, 3 titles at Texas. In his 23 total seasons, 20 of those at Texas from 1957 to 76. Barry Switzer, high percentage of national championships with 3 in 16 years. Look at Pop Warner, 3 national championships in 44 years at Cornell, Carlisle, Stanford, and other stops. Bud Wilkinson, we talked about how remarkable his career was at Oklahoma, 3 national championships in 17 years. Bobby Bowden, in all the years that he coached at West Virginia and Florida State, had the 2 national titles in 1993 and 99. Joe Paterno, we're going to give more clarification to this statistic. 2 national titles in 46 years. Dabo, 2 in 15 years at Clemson. And, of course, he's still going. And pretty remarkable what Pete Carroll accomplished at USC from 2001 through 2009 with 2 national titles in 9 seasons. And he played for another one. And we will talk a little bit more Pete Carroll in just a second. Much like bowl games, conference championships are lessening in importance. They're still important. They're still to be valued, but nowhere near the past in college football. And that's going to become even more emphasized as we go into a 12-team playoff era. But conference championships all time, extremely important, extremely valuable. Let's see the coaches that accomplish the most in regards to conference titles. Bud Wilkinson had 13 in 17 years at Oklahoma. That is crazy. Urban Meyer, 7 conference championships in 15 years. So almost half the time he won a conference championship at Florida and Ohio State. Nick Saban, 11 of 27, a little bit lower than you might expect. Barry Switzer, this is another crazy number, 12 Big 8 championships in 16 years. Tom Osborne had 13 in 25 years, and Switzer kept him from a ton of those early in his career, and then he really cleaned house in the late 80s into the 90s at Nebraska. There you see Bobby Bowden with 12 ACC championships in 18 years, so much of Bobby Bowden's success in the 80s was as an independent. So this is after 1992 when Florida State joined the ACC and just completely dominated the league for over 10 seasons. Joe Paterno, 3 conference championships in 19 years. So keep in mind, Penn State was an independent when Penn State was at its best. They joined the Big Ten in 1993, and Paterno won just 3 conference championships as basically Ohio State dominated the field most of that way. Wisconsin to an extent. Michigan won some championships during Paterno's closing stint at Penn State. John McKay, 9 Pac-10 championships, Pac-8 championships for him in 16 years. Woody Hayes had a remarkable run, of course, at Ohio State with 13 in 28 years with the Buckeyes, and many of those in the 70s. The Bear, 15 in 38 years. Darrell Royal won 11 Southwest Conference championships in 23 years at Texas. Now, again, let's understand another component here is that all the conference championships now, they are outright conference championships, but back in Bo and Woody's day and back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, up until conference championship games started with the SEC in 1992, you had a lot of shared championships. So the amount of conference championships was greater then because they could be shared. Pete Carroll, this is a crazy stat. At USC for 9 seasons, did not win the conference his first year and his last year. He won 7 consecutive. The next metric we go to, I think, is also pretty critical in understanding the excellence and consistency of excellence for these coaches. We're going to look at the number of seasons they coached and how many times they placed in the top 10 and the top 5 in the nation. So I apologize if the order in which I'm running down these coaches isn't exactly in line with the graphics, because I'm doing the voiceover first and then I want to place the graphics in a certain order to go from most successful to least, from top to bottom. But Bud Wilkinson, my goodness, 17 years at Oklahoma, finished in the top 10 14 times, top 5 10 of 17 seasons. Urban Meyer, 15 years, Florida, Ohio State in particular, finished in the top 10 11 times, 8 times in the top 5. Nick Saban, 13 times in the top 5 out of 27 years. And again, I knocked out the years at Toledo because really no shot of finishing top 5, top 10. And I did that for all the coaches who coached at minor schools. Barry Switzer with a dominant run, as you see right there, with 10 top 5 finishes in 16 years. Tom Osborne had an extremely consistent run of top 10 finishes. Joe Paterno as well really dominated there in the late 60s at Penn State, through the 70s, into the 80s. And then he had really good teams in the 90s and 2000s, but nowhere close to what it was before. So 23 top 10 finishes for Joe Paterno in 46 years. There you see Bobby Bowden, of course, was remarkable in the late 80s throughout the 90s in finishing in the top 5 in the nation. We'll get to that in just a second. You see the other notables there with Woody Hayes finishing with 12 top 5 finishes in 28 years. That's crazy. Bear Bryant with 14 in 38 years. Darrell Royal didn't finish in the top 10 or the top 5 as much as you would have thought based on his winning percentage. Bo Schembechler never won a national championship, and consistently, though, had Michigan in the top 10 in the country. 21 seasons in Ann Arbor, 17 top 10 finishes. Pete Carroll had, again, the 9 seasons at USC. Not only did he finish in the top 10 7 times, he finished in the top 5 7 times. Now, there are certain important aspects to all this that we really can't account for. We can talk about situations and circumstances, administrations, recruiting, all those things, and we can talk about it and try to give more credit to certain coaches and less credit, take it away from certain coaches, because there are a lot of factors involved. How supportive is the school? What conference did he play in? How tough was the competition? Because that could help you, but of course could also hurt the winning percentage. How difficult was it to recruit in that area of the country? How many resources did you have? Did you have a ton of money to work with, ton of resources, ton of personnel, or not? Again, different eras called for different championship formats and all sorts of things. We had desegregation that started sometime in the 60s. Well, for the northern teams, they were playing black players back in the 40s and 50s, but it wasn't fully, college football fully implemented and fully segregated and then desegregated until really around 1970. So that changes a ton right there. And so a lot of that is impossible to grasp, and only one knows when you boil it all down and put it all together who truly is the greatest coach of all time. But one other thing, I'd like to go through some aspects of this that put the numbers better into perspective. Let's start with Joe Paterno. Won 2 national championships. He was at Penn State forever. 46 years, 1966 through 2011. That's crazy. Only 2 national championships, but he had 5 undefeated teams. So he could claim 7 national championships. Just like these programs do, the coaches could claim national champion. What else was he going to do? And in those seasons, he won major bowl games against top 5 opponents. So it's not like he played a group of 5 kind of schedule. Now, when Penn State was an independent, in the 60s, their schedule was much lighter. Now, when they were an independent in the 80s, things changed dramatically. The independent status of these schools and how good they were, Miami, Florida State, and others, shot up. And Penn State went from having easier schedules in the 60s to extremely, some of the most difficult schedules you would ever see before joining the Big Ten. Keep in mind, Urban Meyer won 3 national championships, but he also had the undefeated team at Utah, and he had an undefeated team at Ohio State. And if you look at condense his run, then you make a strong case for Urban Meyer being the greatest of all time during a condensed period of time. But there should also be consideration given to, even though Meyer's got a better winning percentage than Nick Saban, let's say, the longer you coach, the more difficult it is to keep up that winning percentage, because more likelihood that you're going to run into adversity. And just mere math is going to drag you down, most likely. Bobby Bowden, this run of 14 consecutive seasons with top 4 finishes. Okay, let's give an incredible amount of credit there for consistent excellence. Let's also understand that, of course, the easy thing to figure out there is, boom, wow, he would have gone to the playoff for 14 consecutive years? Okay. Florida State finished in the top 4 14 consecutive years. They won 11 of 14 bowl games. So in some of those years, they would not have been in the top 4 prior to selection of a playoff. So it's an incredible run, and they would have made the playoff a lot of those years, probably 11 or 12, but not all 14, because that's sometimes claimed by Bobby Bowden backers, and I get it. It's remarkable. Bill Snyder, okay, he's not going to show up on any of these lists in terms of all-time wins, winning percentage, any of that, or never came really close to winning a national championship at Kansas State. Bill Snyder never fielded an elite team at Kansas State, but is he the greatest coach of all time? You can actually make an argument. One of our commenters commented to the channel, Bill Snyder's the greatest coach of all time. Go through Kansas State's records pre-Bill Snyder, 60s, 70s, 80s. It is incredibly awful. It's like nothing we've seen since. Northwestern would be the last into the 70s and 80s. 0-11, 2-9, 3-8, 0-11. He gets there. This is incredible. Kansas State had never finished ranked. Never. 57 years of football since the poll era started, when Bill Snyder first got Kansas State to a final ranking in 1993. And then his teams finished ranked in the top 25 13 times at a school, 13 times in 22 years at a school that had never had a team finish in the top 20 or 25. He won or went to 5 conference championship games. Bill Snyder did a remarkable job. Just look at when he left Kansas State. Ron Prince came in for 3 years, and then Bill Snyder back in, and did not bring Kansas State, to be fair, to the level of pre-Ron Prince. But again, they went back from 4 and 5 wins to winning 8, 9 games and getting to bowl games consistently. Barry Alvarez, similar situation in Wisconsin. And for Barry Alvarez, it's even more about what he left at Wisconsin. Took over a bad football program, 1-10 football program. Took him a couple years, won 3 Rose Bowls, was a consistent contender in the Big Ten, not elite nationally, finished in the top 5 range 3 times, the 3 times that they won the Rose Bowl. But other than that, we're typically a top 15 to 20 team, 9-3 type of team there at Wisconsin. But he set the stage for completely changing Wisconsin football on the Big Ten map and the national radar until today, because it's never waned since. He's basically made Wisconsin relevant, and it's stayed. Dabo Swinney, again, Clemson had not won a national title since 1981. They had not finished in the top 10 since 1990. And this was a proud football tradition that was roughly top 15 in wins. So there was history there. So it wasn't a Bill Snyder type reclamation project, but Dabo Swinney, what he achieved and continues to, we'll see if they can bounce back and he can add to his legacy. Really started in 2011, winning the ACC for the first time, but really kicked in as an elite. 2013, 14, 15, of course, going to the national championship game. And what he achieved for 5 to 10 years there is crazy good, considering, again, it was not one of the Blue Bloods. It was Clemson. And then again, Urban Meyer, and any coach who's able, Nick Saban as well, to go to any stop. And as soon as they walk on campus, Urban Meyer is probably the best example of that. Unless you've got another one for me. Somebody who just, Bowling Green, Utah, Florida, Ohio State, as soon as he steps on campus, they're better. There are some other coaches that I would love to get to. There's really just too many as we really break this. Jim Tressel, great run at Ohio State, of course. We saw his record at 106-22. Maybe he should be in this discussion as well. Jimbo Fisher, of course, the ending of his career, and it may not be the end for him, but has not been pretty. Terry Donahue at UCLA, and so many others to talk about. And again, we're witnessing something with Kirby Smart at Georgia that is crazy good. And we're also witnessing something, a dynamic with Jim Harbaugh at Michigan, where he built up the Stanford program to BCS bowl level, did what he did at Michigan here in the last 10 years. And then also in between, if we want to merge the NFL and college football, then you really go to Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll just leaps up the chart if we're going to include greatest coaches of all time in football. Then you got Pete Carroll, and you've got Barry Switzer, and you got Jimmy Johnson, of course, whose stint at Miami is just way too short, and he did some nice things at Oklahoma State prior to that for him to be considered the GOAT. The most successful college football coach ever is Nick Saban. I don't know if he's the greatest of all time, but because he is the most successful and is certainly in a great argument, we've only scratched the surface here, greatest of all time. I have no issue with anyone who calls Nick Saban the greatest of all time. I have done it myself. Your thoughts below, your comments as well. We can continue this conversation. We'll see how much people want to talk about such things and the history of college football. I got to say, when Nick Saban retired, most of you wanted to talk about who's going to replace him at Alabama. I wanted to talk about Nick Saban's legacy and make these kind of historical comparisons. Love it. Appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. We will see you soon. Please like, subscribe, share these videos out on social media.